Thank you, Andy, and thanks everyone for joining. Also like to thank Adrian Healy for putting us in touch and inviting me. I wanted to talk today about some work that I've been working on in Cape Town with my colleague Gina Zeevogel, who is basically the PI for this research project, I'm not directly working with her anymore, but there's still a lot of kind of threads to follow up on from what we've been doing with this, which has been quite exciting. So basically, I want to talk today about the role of co-produced knowledge for climate adaptation and water justice, and specifically a tool or a methodology called SenseMaker. As I mentioned, I want to just kind of acknowledge Gina's role in this. She's not going to be presenting today, but she's been really instrumental to making a lot of this happen. To kind of give a bit of a background or overview, sorry, here we go. So Gina and I were working in a project funded by the AXA Foundation that looks at water governance for urban resilience in the Cape Town context. And the whole project is sort of starts of a premise from that we're kind of arguing that in order to strengthen resilience, you have to kind of understand the different perspectives on water and approaches to managing it. So kind of acknowledging that in a city, and especially in a city like Cape Town that is very diverse and very unequal, you're going to have a lot of people who use water and depend on water in very different ways. And in order to strengthen resilience, you have to kind of address that. So the objectives with this project has been to try and capture the different perspectives on water governance at the city level and at local sort of community and household level. And then also to kind of explore how these different perspectives can be brought together across these levels towards sort of effective and equitable practices and policies. And our interest in this kind of comes from, as many of you might have heard a few years ago, between 2015 and 2018, Cape Town was struck by a really severe drought. And the day zero crisis was talked about in the international media. So the city was kind of coming very close to having to turn off all its water taps. It was a really real threat that domestic taps were going to be turned off and people would have to queue for water. And this narrative became very dominant and really kind of took over and defined Cape Town's water crisis in many ways. And that kind of became how the water situation in Cape Town became known. But I think as many of the people who live in Cape Town are aware, the water challenges are much broader than this. And there are many of them that have been going on for many years before the drought. Especially if you look at low-income areas of the city and people who live in informal settlements. And we're also coming at this from a point of the kind of a climate adaptation point of view, where we'd like to think of climate adaptation as something that doesn't just involve environmental issues, but it also needs to build the capacity to address inequality and injustice in society. And here we kind of draw or make a distinction between more incremental adaptation and transformative adaptation, where transformative adaptation really broadens the focus to include both social and environmental challenges. And some of that is captured in this figure that we've used in one of our papers, where we'd like to draw attention to the kind of the knowledge creation phase of adaptation intervention. So often in a climate adaptation literature, the focus is on what you're implementing, what you're doing, and what change that will have. But that kind of ignores the phase of knowledge creation, where you actually develop the understanding of what the problem is. And here we really view knowledge as critical for making a difference, like shifting from incremental adaptation to transformative adaptation. So if you want to have climate adaptation that addresses social as well as environmental issues, you need to have an understanding of how the breadth of those types of issues, what they look like and how they are interconnected, And to do that, you often need to draw on multiple types of knowledge. So multiple, whether that's multiple disciplines in academia or going beyond academia and also involving other knowledge systems and ways of understanding the world. And I think what's really critical here is that these types of knowledge systems can't be seen as just kind of in conflict or competing with each other, but should really be seen as complementary and kind of helping together form an enriched picture of what the problem actually is that you're trying to address. And so this is obviously kind of like a nice idea that I think many people would subscribe to, but I think it's not as easy to do this in practice. So we were quite curious to try to figure out how could we use this way of thinking to look at the Cape Town situation and the water challenges that are really dominant there. And we approached this by starting to develop a partnership with a local community organization. So this partnership emerged basically between three partners. It was us as researchers from UCT, University of Cape Town, and the community organization is called the Western Cape Water Caucus. So that's basically formed by residents in different low-income areas, informal settlements, and other kind of, well, so-called townships, as they're called in South Africa, who have been working with water issues for about 20 years now. And then Environmental Monitoring Group is an NGO that both Gina and the Water Caucus have been involved with for several years. So they were instrumental to kind of putting us in touch and identifying our kind of common interests that we had around these issues. And that was a really key part in building this partnership as well. We didn't come in saying like, okay, we're going to do this study, we're going to ask these questions and go to these areas and find this type of information, but we rather to say, we as academics are interested in studying water issues in low-income areas, and we want to do this in a way that supports community organizations and the work that they are doing, and we want to understand multi-level water governance. And by that was what I was kind of referring to in the beginning, how different perspectives on water at different levels can be bridged or kind of acknowledged together for more sustainable and effective water governance. So that was our interest as academics. And through these meetings and discussions that we had with the Water Caucus, it emerged that their interests were to, first of all, collect better evidence to support their community work. So by that, I mean that they had often tried to interact with city officials and municipal officers and so on to demand better services or solve problems. But often what they were faced with was, okay, that's all good and well, but what's your evidence here? You're saying that there's a problem here. How do we know that that's a widespread problem? So the Western Cape Water Caucus really wanted to be able to show the city that they have data, that they have evidence to kind of back up their claims. And they realized that like that legitimacy was something that they might be able to get from us as academics. So they wanted better evidence, and they also wanted to build internal capacity in their organization so that they could get some experience in doing studies themselves, knowing how to collect data that will be more credible and so on. So from this kind of starting point, we also started discussing what kind of methodology to use, and we ended up settling on this tool that I mentioned earlier called SenseMaker, which is a narrative-based tool that basically invites the respondent to share an experience, but then also code the story that they have shared. So it's not just up to the researcher to later on sit and interpret what the story was about, but the respondent themselves are invited to also signify what their story was about. This project, the main part of the project ended early 2020 in terms of data collection and the more intensive parts. And we've so far produced two research papers that I think was shared also in the invite to this seminar, and also a few other outputs in terms of research briefs and student thesis and other kind of reports about the project are available as well. But I'm today going to talk primarily about these two papers. The first one on the left here describes the study itself and the findings that we found in terms of water issues in local communities. And the second one is about the role of these types of partnerships, academic community partnerships for capacity building and the role of knowledge creation has in that. So basically the structure of this project as we designed it was centered around two workshops and two 4-day workshops in 2019. And the first one was really centered on just design and designing the data collection and designing the research question. And the two screenshots you see here of where it's a sense maker, that's actually screenshots from the mobile phone app version of the SenseMaker tool, where basically the Water Caucus members that we worked with, who were the ones that went out and collected stories, they could use these to input the data and kind of get the responses from respondents, and it kind of gives you also, it shows you some of what the sort of structure of these interviews was. So it's basically quite simple. It has a prompting question that asks respondents to share a positive or negative experience of when they try to address a water-related issue in their community. And then the rest of the questions are basically about what happens in your story, in your community, how do things are? So how do things work out when you try to solve water-related problems? So this means that you capture both a qualitative component, the story that's very sort of open-ended and the respondent can choose whatever they want to talk about. And then there is also these more structured and systematic ways of categorizing the story that has been shared. And all of these, the prompting question and the follow-up questions, were all designed jointly between us and the Water Caucus, based on their knowledge of the situation on the ground and our knowledge of kind of academic research and kind of what will be easier to analyze and so on. And then after the first workshop, we had about 3 months where the Water Caucus members that participated, there were 12 of them, they went out into their communities and collected stories, talked to their neighbors, talked to people they know in the community that have had issues to share around water and related concerns. And then the second workshop, which was in October, was all about kind of analyzing this data, preparing it for further communication to other stakeholders and so on. And then we had a period from until the beginning of January 2020, where we had activities to return stories and return findings to the local communities, to also communicate with the city, and have reflections and a sort of a wrap up of the project for sort of our internal learning as well between us as researchers and the activist group, the Water Caucus. And to tell you a little bit about the findings themselves, we collected over 300 stories, or the Water Caucus members collected over 300 stories in various areas of Cape Town. The yellow disc you see here is where members actually live, so that was kind of their primary point they focused on. But as you see, there's also stories that were captured from other areas as well. And what is most common, what people have are struggling with the most is bills and pricing, so that they get water bills that are too high or that for some reason are not correct, and that they basically are struggling to pay for water, and that's kind of threatening their ability to access water services. The second most common problem is WMDs, which is water management devices. So these are a kind of water meter that the city has started using to basically control how much water a household can use. And the idea with this is that the city claims that this is in order to guarantee that poor households have access to basic amount of water for free. And if you can't pay after that, it cuts off your consumption. But what often happens, unfortunately, is that these devices don't always work, that they can leak and then report or indicate that the household has used up its quota, or they are installed without consent of the resident or not without proper information about how they work, so people struggle to access water. So they have, even though they're supposed to solve a problem, they have become one of the most contentious issues that people have, and especially then in the low-income areas where they are, where they've been installed primarily. Leaks are also a very common problem. Worth noting here is that water restrictions and problem with low water pressure is quite far down the list, which is interesting considering the fact that this was done only a year after the stories were collected, only a year after the water crisis in Cape Town. But as you see, households that have problems with accessing enough water, it's not a major issue. They have the problems that are most common have been around for longer than the water crisis. And to dive a little deeper into the stories themselves as well, what our method enabled is that you can plot all the 311 stories on these triads. So this is the follow-up questions that respondents were asked to respond to after they'd share a story. So for example, after you share a story, we asked them, in your story, did people's efforts result in a solution, a temporary fix, or no improvement at all? And this is a very neat way of kind of getting an overview of what the general trends are in the full sample and the full data set. And what's also nice is that you can then link each of these dots to a specific story. So to give an example of a story, this one is called Waterless. And the respondent explained that when my grandma's house water was cut off, oh my word, it was horrible. There are 3 families living on the property, but their income is not that much, which means that the water bill is an extremely high expense. They had to ask neighbors and family for buckets of water to survive. After struggling for many, many months, the matter was addressed, but by that time, the children were sick and the ladies in the house had infections. So this story, the respondent coded as resulting in no improvement, and they also claim that in their community, resolving water problems usually requires bypassing the law. So they clearly have no sort of trust in the municipality or the authorities addressing the problems for residents anymore. Another example is about a story of a leak in a water management device, or a meter, as it's often referred to. There was a leak in the outside tap, which is the main supply for the house. I phoned the municipality, but there is still no one that has come to fix the leak. I had to make do on my own by hiring a plumber to fix it. So in this case, the story was coded as a temporary fix because it wasn't really addressing the key problem. And it's also an example of a story where the respondent had to resort to informal channels, so kind of rely on the local community or hiring help themselves. And there's also other kind of examples of how the quantitative data can bring up pattern in the bigger sample of qualitative stories. So something that we thought was interesting was to look at how many stories are actually success stories. Are there any positive stories? And overall, there's only about sort of 13, 14, 15% of stories that have where people actually manage to solve their problem. So I've included one of them here in the green, where a person described that yesterday, I woke up in the morning and found that our tap's head was gone and the water was flowing out. I tried to stop the water by sticking a pipe in it. I called the municipality office and reported it. They came on the same day and fixed it by replacing the pipe with a new tap. I was so happy to see that they are there for our problems and sort them out with no delays. And this is a positive one, obviously, but it also really stands out. I think this is the one story in 300 that was this positive and such a glowing review of the municipality. So obviously it's a problem that so few problems get solved. And the ones that do, more often than the municipality, what we found is actually that it's the local community or the residents themselves that find a solution. So that also speaks to how it's a sort of sense of abandonment that we found in many stories there, where people don't feel like they're seen or acknowledged by the municipality anymore. The second thing I wanted to draw attention here, though, is that it's still a minority of stories where people actually talk to municipality and don't get help. Often, as in the other kind of gray pieces of the pie here, people don't know who to call at all, or they can't reach the right person, or they can't reach anyone. So in most cases, there's not even a connection or communication between the municipality and local residents. Though in some cases, the municipality or the local city council just simply fails to address people's problems. So I'll read the last story here. I have no faith in the council as my complaints fall on deaf ears. I have a blue water meter and it has not been working properly since day one. I have reported it many times and was promised that it will be seen to. It kept leaking water and my water allocation will run out quickly. So this person is clearly just fed up with the continued failure to live up to the promises that the city is making. So once we kind of processed this data and gone through all the stories with the Water Caucus members, our kind of activist researchers, a really important thing was also to share these insights with the communities where it had been studied. And this is where this is sort of a phase where we started shifting more responsibility to the Water Caucus as well. Giving them support, of course, but making sure that they felt ownership of the process as well and ownership of the study. And they were really creative in developing role plays and discussions in the sessions that we had in the local communities that they had studied and collected stories, and found really cool ways of engaging with them while also using the posters and the kind of the quantitative data that emerged from the study too. So it was really interesting to see the ways they were claiming this ownership and putting the study to use towards the ends that they had in their work. And this phase after the data analysis also included a lot of internal reflection on the challenges that we had in the process, because it was a really interesting journey from both us as researchers, our perspective, and I think for the Water Caucus, who had never really done anything like this before. And there was a lot of unexpected learnings, both kind of unexpected challenges and things that we learned as well as researchers in terms of how you talk about research questions and studies and how you formulate interview questions to get the information that you want from respondents. And there's also a certain level of limitations on the capacity that a local organization like this has. So you have to kind of really balance the curiosity that's often there in the beginning with what you can actually carry out and execute fully. And so in addition to sharing insights with communities, the Water Caucus also had a lot of engagement with city representatives. So City of Cape Town's water department had staff present at both of the workshops, especially the second one, where during the last day, there were 5 very senior officials there and who participated in discussions of the findings. And I was actually very positively surprised by how interested they were in the data, and especially the qualitative data. And I think we came to realize that the water department, they do their annual sort of customer satisfaction survey, and they have the quantitative data on the number of leaks there are and how many households are lacking toilets and so on. But they don't have the more qualitative understanding of people's daily struggles and the challenges of trying to fix a problem where you don't know where to go to, and so the having that data come through this study was really valuable to them, and it was really interesting to see how for some of them they really shifted some of their thinking. So we had really interesting discussions with them on how this type of data can be shared with the water department, and how it's currently, there's a lot of limitations in that. And we also had a very promising kind of momentum going, which unfortunately got a bit interrupted by COVID. There were more meetings planned between the Water Caucus and the city independently without our involvement. But that unfortunately got cancelled or postponed since South Africa went into lockdown in March last year. But it's interesting to reflect on this also in light of Cape Town's more broader water challenges, because the drought that the city went through really pushed the city to think about and discuss and develop a new water strategy that has put a lot of emphasis on more collaborative relationships and building better trust between communities and the city by promoting sort of transparency and mutual accountability. And they even talk about enabling and being responsive to citizen-led water initiatives, and using comprehensive data that is collected both by the city and by communities for their decision making and for their interventions. So this is really promising, and this really shows that there is high level interest in these types of data that we've generated here. But the caveat is here that the city doesn't really have any concrete plans for how to do these things. So we really think that tools like SenseMaker or this in general, these kind of more participatory approaches where academics get involved can really play an important role here for this to work. And yeah, so just to conclude, I want to kind of summarize what I've talked about. I think the study itself shows that there's a lot of frustration and sense of abandonment in local communities. And largely this is due to the kind of mismatch between cities' interventions and the realities on the ground and the problems that people face. Often the cities fails to kind of see the complexity there and implement more technical interventions or simple solutions to a small part of the problem rather than looking at it more holistically. So that mismatch doesn't really create long-term solutions. And we also saw how these stories can be a really useful way of validating the lived experiences of local residents. What they often see is, or what the comment that we got in some of these story return sessions in local communities was that people, for the first time, it seemed, realize that many others are struggling in the same way as they are too. Often people think that they are doing something wrong because it isn't working for them, but people start to realize more and more that these are issues that occur in many different informal settlements and in many different townships. We also saw the whole process, the collaboration between us and the Water Caucus. It was really interesting to see how knowledge and knowledge creation has a role to play in empowerment. And we saw empowerment in at least 3 different ways. First, there was empowerment in terms of personal agency, where individual members learned to go out and do interviews, collect data, and kind of handle data in a way that they hadn't done before. And they also gained confidence in terms of approaching members in their community and asking them about their issues and so on. So there's a lot of kind of personal growth there. There was an empowerment in terms of the collective legitimacy of the Water Caucus. They saw when they had this study and had this data to present to the city, how they were received in a completely different way than they had before. And they were able to participate in discussions, maybe not as equals, but as more of a kind of a recognized and legitimate partner in a collaboration. We also saw empowerment in terms of the relational capacity of the Water Caucus, that they were quite good at leveraging their expertise and using their collaboration with us as academics and drawing on our position both as holders of formal knowledge and sort of scientific legitimacy, but also especially GINA's relations with the city to kind of to find ways to address their concerns. And lastly, I think for us as researchers, we really see this as interesting in terms of thinking about transformation, because it was, in a way, it was transformative for us because there was so much unexpected learning and a kind of reciprocal learning that happened for us as well, in terms of how you build an understanding and how you study problems and how you execute a research project. But I think also perhaps more importantly, it turned out to be a really useful way to develop a more nuanced and context-specific knowledge about water issues in this context. And I think because of the challenges that the city faces and that are so different in low-income areas and in informal settlements specifically, you really need to have something like this that can deal with this nuance and can acknowledge that challenges are going to be different, even sometimes down at the household level, depending on everyone's circumstance. So so that was really valuable, I think. I think I'm going to stop there. These are the links to the papers, or the titles of the papers. I'm sure you have the links as well in the email invite. Otherwise, I'm happy to share that. But yeah, I'm going to stop there and open up for questions and discussions if you have any.
Fantastic. Thank you, Johan. Yeah, as normal, if anybody has any questions, could you please sort of put them in the chat or raise a hand using the reactions button? That would be really helpful, please. There was one question that came in on the chat, and that was, could you explain what you mean by transgressive learning that was mentioned on the first graph?
Yeah, so this is a term that comes in from, so we work with two scholars from Stellenbosch University as well. They are kind of the experts, if you will, in using since they've used SenseMaker several times before. So they were kind of basically the facilitators of the two workshops that involved a lot of learning for us, me and Gina as well. And so transgressive learning is something that comes in from that field of and yeah, to be honest, I have to I have to look exactly what the definition is, but it's basically it talks about, it is about kind of learning that goes beyond your kind of regular ways of academic learning, for example, or like where you just how should I say? I mean, the kind of more learning that is about kind of acquiring knowledge. That is, I think, is more about kind of embodied approaches and learning through so lived experiences, for example, and so both in terms of the way that the learning is happening, but also what you're learning about and the purpose of the learning. So it's more relevant in transdisciplinary research, where part of the objective is not just learning, but also action and change making. So it's yeah, it's unfortunately not the best explanation, but it's kind of putting you in the general direction of what it is about.
That's great. Thanks, Johan. Okay,
yes.
we've got a couple of questions come through